Numbers continue to rise as the second wave of COVID-19 sweeps through the nation. Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. With a record-breaking daily total of 65 set just this week, Grand Bahama's upward spiral in COVID cases and the re-emergence of growing numbers in New Providence, we have everything to be concerned about. And if that's not enough, Bimini, Cat Key, Cat Island, the Barry Islands, Moores Island, Great Guanakee, Exuma and the Abacos have all been added to the list of islands with positive COVID-19 cases. And now, the threat of Tropical Storm Isaias. Tonight on The Record, we talk response and readiness. Don't go anywhere. Our conversation begins right after this quick break. The project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
at the conference, more at the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. Our topic tonight is response and readiness. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Thanks for watching. Amidst the global pandemic and our own second surge, we are still recovering 11 months after the destruction of Hurricane Dorian. And now here comes a tropical storm. On Wednesday, a tropical storm watch was issued for the entire Bahamas. Our focus tonight is twofold: the continued response to the COVID-19 resurgence and our readiness for the first weather threat of the season. My guest for this portion of the show is a meteorologist at the Bahamas Department of Meteorology, Mr. Greg Thompson. Greg, thanks for joining us. Let's talk a little bit now about the characteristics of this weather system. We've been told by all accounts and by how you measure storms that this is not a big storm, but yet any storm has the potential to do damage. Tell us a little bit about what makes this unique and why we need to continue to be concerned at this point.
Thanks again, Jerome, and good evening, everybody. Well, of course, Tropical Storm Isaias is fast approaching us. It's moving rather quickly at a very fast forward speed, interacting with the mountain ranges across Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. The system actually was having a hard time getting started to become a tropical storm. We didn't have a low-level circulation. That's one of the criteria they use for categorizing these systems. But because it took so long to have this low-level circulation, it was still a potential tropical depression. And overnight it became a tropical storm. The system has quite a bit of the activity more towards the northeast and away from the system. The center of circulation seems to, appears to be just to the south of the Dominican Republic, and it is going to continue to move across the Dominican Republic and Hispaniola in general, and move towards the north and west, affecting the southeast Bahamas late tonight and into tomorrow. So this system has winds up to, I think it's about 60 miles per hour now. Tropical storm conditions expected to begin affecting those areas. Of course, tropical storm winds start anywhere from 39 to 73 miles per hour. And this system has winds that are categorized as a tropical storm.
Take us through now the possible track that this storm could make. Where it is now, it's coming over a landmass, and that usually affects a storm. But what is the potential that we're looking at over the next few days as this moves on up along the island chain?
Well, first of all, the Southeast Bahamas and Turks and Caicos Islands, you guys will be experiencing very strong winds up to tropical storm conditions. The showers and thunderstorms wrapping around on the north and east side, northeast quadrant as we tend to refer to with these systems, which we call the dirty side. Most of the weather occurs on that quadrant. affecting the Turks and Caicos Islands, Southeast Bahamas, eventually moving into the central Bahamas by tomorrow on Friday, and eventually affecting the Northwest Bahamas by Saturday. Very strong winds, lots of showers and thunderstorms. Turks and Caicos Islands now experiencing some of that as we speak. We had some earlier calls from the Turks and Caicos Islands wanting to know when they should allow some people to go home this evening. They're trying to secure as much of property down there as we speak. So eventually tonight, Turks and Caicos Islands, Southeast Bahamas, including Inagua, Maguana, the Ragged Island chain, and Acklins and Crooked Island. By tomorrow, we expect it to be moving into affecting the central Bahamas, and that's all the islands south of New Providence. That includes South Andros, the Exuma chain, Cat Islands, San Salvador, Rum Key, Maguana, and the Long Island area. And that will eventually move into the Northwest Bahamas on Saturday, late Friday into Saturday.
What kind of characteristics are we looking at? You would have talked about it being a fast-moving storm, which, you know, in meteorological language, I think is a good thing once it's moving quickly. But what kinds of conditions are we expecting in these islands as it moves on up?
Well, as the system continues to move towards the north, we expect heavy rainfall, expecting anywhere from 4 to 8 inches of rain. So low-lying and flood-prone areas will be susceptible to receiving those rainfall amounts. We're asking residents to take the necessary precautions to mitigate against damage to your property due to flooding. We could also see some possible tornadic activity as well in the rain bands as the system continues to move towards the north and west, as well as some very strong gusty winds in those showers and thunderstorms. So conditions starting to go down in the Southeast Bahamas and eventually spreading towards the north and west as the system pulls up towards the area.
Earlier in the season, we were hearing about this Sahara Desert dust that was blowing over, that was seemingly having some effect. Has this been contributing positively, negatively to the season, to these storms, and has that factored in at all into what we're looking at right now?
For the most part, yes, Saharan, we call it the Saharan dust layer or the Saharan air layer. Lots of dust that come off of the Saharan deserts. We've been seeing quite a bit of that for this season, an unusual amount, an early part of the season. With this system, the dust did inhibit its development earlier, but we tend to want to see more of the dust on the north and west side, so that the system, as it wraps around into the system, that intrudes into the system and helps to weaken it some. But most of the dust now is to the north and east, away from the system. And of course, the forward speed plays a big factor. We do anticipate some slow movement as it moves across Hispaniola tonight, but the National Hurricane Center do anticipate some further strengthening or re-strengthening once it moves off of Hispaniola and into the Bahamian waters.
We have been in the hurricane season since, June 1st. We're now at the end of July. Traditionally, our biggest and most dangerous storms come later on in the year. End of August and September is usually the peak season for the dangerous storms that we're getting. Are we noticing anything different this season with the storms? Anything that we need to be concerned about at this point?
Well, to be quite frank, the National Hurricane Center and all the agencies that do forecast the hurricane season expects an above average season. They expect up to 20 named storms. We don't expect those amounts. This is a large amount. And as we approach the peak of the season, which begins just around middle to late portions of August into early portions of September, that's where we do see these very strong storms coming off, strong tropical waves coming off of Africa. And they have a lot of water and area to cover as they're coming across the Atlantic Ocean. Of note, the Atlantic is exceptionally warm this year, and that is one of the fuel for these systems. We still see some Saharan dust coming across, so we may get some of the tropical waves not getting their act together due to the dust. But we are imploring and we are urging the public to get ready. This is now the time, if you haven't done it already, to prepare or have your hurricane plan in place. Do the necessary things around your property that you need to have done before the season approaches, or the season peaks. Anything to do with your roofing, your windows, etc. Now is the time to get that done.
Can you tell us the difference between those storms that come off of the coast of Africa and those forming in the southeastern Caribbean? You would have mentioned in your comments and about those coming off the coast of Africa. Are they more dangerous? Can you compare them to those to the southeastern Caribbean?
Well, the southeastern Caribbean storms tend to have a shorter window in which to get developed, and a lot of them tend to make it into the Gulf of Mexico and move into the Florida area. But as I mentioned earlier, the storms that come off of Africa, they have a lot of area to cover, a lot of area to develop, that open ocean. They do get most of the energy from the what we call latent heat release from condensation, the thunderstorm development. And the water, as I mentioned, also is exceptionally warm this time around, so they have quite a bit of fuel to get their act together.
I know that the Met Office would have sustained some damage to some radars during Hurricane Dorian. What's the status on those radars, and how is it impacting your ability to accurately forecast?
Well, of course, we had 3 radars up and running, one in Abaco, one here in New Providence, and the other one in Long Island. We still have plans for, I think it's 2 more. We're supposed to have 4 brand new ones, and the radar that we had initially here at the airport was supposed to be reconditioned and placed in the Ragged Island chain. Of course, you know, Ragged Island is recovering. Dorian did quite a bit of damage in the Abacos. BEC, I understand, is responsible in trying to get the infrastructure back up and running. That is our main problem. I think that's happening in the Abacos. But of course, New Providence radar is up and running, Long Island's radar is up and running, and those we really count on those to stay up and running. Maguana is supposed to be the other site for the extreme southeast Bahamas. With all those radars in place, we would have total coverage for the entire chain of islands, and that's something we need.
Greg, once we, would have heard from the Met Office, we would have heard from the NEMA press conference yesterday about what the storm was intended to do. I think a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief because they realized it was not an intense storm. And I think people have even started to relax a bit. Do you advise against that? Should you always be in that heightened state of readiness, or just sort of watch it and respond as necessary?
No, you should remain at a heightened state of readiness. We always try to get everybody started before the hurricane season, making sure you have your hurricane plans in place, and also to take care of the necessary things that have to be done around your property. Of course, when the hurricane season gets in full swing, you won't have that kind of opportunity, especially if a storm is fast approaching you, as this one. But the beginning of the season is the best time to get all your hurricane plans in place and to make sure that you have the necessary things.
Greg, thank you very much. Always great information. We appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. I think the message continues to resound with everyone that we always need to be ready, no matter what the intensity, whether it's a tropical depression, storm. Certainly once we get into hurricane mode, you never let your guard down, as these storms are always moving and changing. And like I always tell people, it is a forecast. It is called a forecast for a reason. So thank you so very much for coming on tonight and talking to us. When we come back, we are joined by the Minister of State for Disaster Preparedness and Management and Reconstruction, Iram. Don't go anywhere. On the Record continues right after this. Welcome to On the Record.
Looking for more On the Record? If you miss our Thursday showing at 8 p.m., join us for the re-airing on Friday mornings at 10, and then again each Sunday night at 8:30. Or go to our YouTube channel and catch up on all of our past episodes. And And then like our Facebook and Instagram pages for a preview of upcoming shows and get a chance to ask your questions. Just look for On the Record.
You're watching On the Record. This segment is made possible by Executive Printers. With COVID-19 shutting down the country for most of the year, it is quite clear that this pandemic is not to be taken lightly. It has brought with it strict measures like social distancing, protective face coverings, lockdowns and curfews. And now we must prepare for the effects of a possible tropical storm or hurricane that can almost throw all of this out of the window. And then there are the islands of Sammarko and Grand Bahama that are still trying to recover from Dorian's catastrophic destruction. My guest tonight will help us to get a better understanding of efforts being made by his ministry. He's the Minister of State for Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, the Honourable Iram, who joins us tonight from Grand Bahama. Minister, welcome again to On the Record. I want to begin with what will happen in an instance like this where you have a storm coming. People have to get out to make preparations. Will there be any consideration given to lifting the curfews and lockdowns as people attempt now to move about to make preparations should this develop into a major weather system?
Good evening, Jerome, and good evening, Bahamas. Yes, we have already made concessions. As you would note, we made an announcement yesterday where the hardware stores are open for persons to access material to protect their homes. We're making efforts now also to ensure that the ATMs are up and running and the banks are open so that persons can access funding to get these materials. We have been receiving requests from the bakeries in Grand Bahama, all of the food stores, to ensure that they are open, and we are allowing the residents of Grand Bahama, and the same concession we allowed for Sammarko, to ensure that in the event that this system becomes major, even if it's not major, we will allow persons to access hardware material as well as food and water.
I've got to ask, you're a Grand Bahamian, you represent a constituency there. What are people feeling right now? You've got a situation where you're in a full-on lockdown, your numbers are rising every day, you're still reeling from a Dorian almost a year ago, and now the first storm of the season. Psychologically, what are you all going through on that island?
I can tell you, we've been taking blows. We've received the gut punch. We've received the uppercuts. We've received the behind the neck blows. And persons are remaining strong. Yeah, there's a certain level of anxiety. There's a certain level of stress. And during my press conference yesterday, I brought in Dr. Gregory Swan, who's a psychologist, to also speak to the mental capacity, because oftentimes we talk about preparing the home, we're talking about preparing our properties, paying insurance, ensuring that we have food in the house, but we don't pay attention to the mental capacity. It is very important for us to reinforce mentally that everything is going to be okay. And we have to continue to speak the positive message, because people can become depressed. They can give up and say, you know what, the hell with it, just let it go. I've had enough. But the good thing is, based on past experiences, from Jane, Wilma, and moving on up, resiliency has been built and been reinforced in Grand Bahama. I've never seen such a strong set of people, as well as Abaconians. The past travesties has strengthened us, in fact. And with that in mind, we still cannot forget that it's very important to mentally reinforce our citizens. So again, there's a lot of anxiety on the street. Persons are rushing to the gas station. They are rushing to the food stores. They're rushing to the hardware store. And oftentimes you see the same individuals on the line, almost as if it's an outing, just to get out, just to vent a bit. But again, yeah, there's a level of anxiety. But as a government, my colleagues and I, Minister for Grand Bahama, the DPM, Minister for Sammarko City, the representative from West Grand Bahama, we are talking to our people. West Grand Bahama had a very, very good meeting last night with a constituency. Sammarko City is doing a zone meeting today just to reinforce and to show the regular citizens that we are here. And in spite of the anxiety and the stress, we'll do our best to get through it as being a resilient people.
Minister, I've got to ask, as people move around and you talk about this anxiety as they prepare, as they meet, as you have said, are you continuing to practice the proper protocols? Because you are still in a lockdown and this virus is still very rampant in your community.
We are certainly abiding by the code protocol. We are enforcing those. Let me start with the police department. Chief Superintendent Ken Taylor, he is on the road on a daily basis, and he is not playing. He and his team, they are patrolling the hotspots. They're ensuring that we have social distancing. They're ensuring that we don't have the large crowd gathered. And if you watch the videos that we posted last week, the streets in Williamstown, Tino Beach, West Grand Bahama, city of Freeport, it's empty. When I look at the report yesterday from the hardware stores, persons are on the line. The lines are long, but they are maintaining the proper distancing. The persons who are operating these facilities, they have the right sanitizers in position. They have the temperature gauge. They're checking temperatures, and they're ensuring that we abide by the COVID-19 protocols. We're not taking any chances. People are scared, and I believe the message is finally getting home right now because of this tremendous spike in numbers in Grand Bahama, in New Providence, and you see it spreading throughout the country right now. Persons are finally getting the message that this is nothing to play with, and according to the Ministry of Health, this wave appears to be a little more infectious and easier to transmit than the previous set, or than at the initial onset of this COVID-19 pandemic. So we are getting the message, and we are abiding by the protocols, and persons are now taking the individual responsibility to do what they have to do. They're going out only if necessary, and when they do go out, they are maintaining social distancing.
That's encouraging, and I hope people really, really get it this time around, because as you said, there's something different about how this is spreading. I want to talk about the press conference that NEMA recently held. There were a lot of concerns raised about shelters, and rightfully so. There were lots of questions. We noticed, for instance, that Abaco and Grand Bahama went from having no shelters to being told to evacuate to now having shelters. Tell us what happened there and why. How did we get from a place where we really weren't sure if people had shelters to now shelters being listed?
Yeah, shelters are being listed because we paid specific attention because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We were initially, prior to the pandemic, preparing shelters going status quo. You're looking at auditoriums, you're looking at church assembly halls. But we focused specifically on preparing the schools. Classrooms will give us the opportunity, we'll put it in a position to separate large crowds, to be able to sanitize, to be able to better manage. The Minister of Education and his team, along with the Ministry for Grand Bahama, the administrators, and the Ministry of Works in Abaco, we have been focusing on preparing the schools. In Moores Island, I spoke to the contractor yesterday, and I take it as a personal task to touch base myself. You want to send your team out, you want to take the message, but I also want to verify. And in Moores Island, I was reassured that the school is ready. The roof is finished, the windows and doors are in, classrooms are being prepared. In addition to that, we have the assembly hall. Mr. Donald Roll in South Abaco at Sandy Point, he's showed me that Sandy Point, Cherokee Sound, Crossing Rocks, those areas are up and running. I got a call from Administrator Boodle Line yesterday that even though we had previously not mentioned Central Abaco Primary School, or better known as CAPS, she assured me yesterday that one block of classrooms is ready to go. So we can now add that to the list.
The other concern, Minister, and we've got a couple other things to cover, is the ability to quarantine people who may show up at a shelter. The reality is you may have people coming into these shelters who are positive. Can you reassure us that, you know, within all of these designated shelters and areas, there are places to isolate people if they show up, identify themselves positive, or they realize that they are?
That is the reason why we're going to the classrooms, and we have redundancies. So in addition to the gyms being ready, we have classrooms where you can isolate. But we are, however, asking person, and as much as possible, if you do not have to leave your home, if you're already in quarantine, the quarantine facilities are hurricane-proof. In Grand Bahama, our major quarantine facility is Breakers Key at our Lukaya Hotel. That is a shelter in itself. So we will not move persons from that area into the shelter. At the Rand Memorial Hospital, we're making provisions. However, at the facility, we will have the temperature gauge. The Ministry of Social Services, they're normally responsible for shelter management. They are putting, procedures in place where persons coming in, everyone will be checked. We have health practitioners as a part of our team. Ms. Williams, she's fully aware. Once we give her the numbers, she'll know how many persons from the health sector to deploy to these shelters. We'll be keeping close monitoring, monitoring our crowd on a regular basis, on a consistent basis. Any signs of temperature rising, we're going to ensure that they're separated and they're put in isolated facilities. So yes, the reason why we chose the classroom is to be able to isolate.
You mentioned that you were going to take a look at what was happening at the Rand Memorial. Grand Bahama still doesn't have a functioning hospital. We ask about it all the time. Are you able to reassure us that if people need medical help on that island, that they will be able to receive it?
It is functioning in part. We have taken down the Samaritan's first, the tent, because of course, you know, that was a tensile fact, it was non-resilient structure. In the Rand Memorial Hospital right now, they have repurposed the emergency waiting area, the trauma center, the emergency room, parts of the corridor leading to the cafeteria. We are working expeditiously to complete the COVID-19 section, and we believe that within another week and a half, that will be finished. We're looking at the end of August, early September, to have the Rand Memorial Hospital general reception area, the pharmacy, the wards, the pediatric section, the operating theater, all of those up and running by certainly before the end of September.
I guess some reassuring news there for the folks there. Overall, you know, this is another delay in the reconstruction in Abaco and Grand Bahama. How far has this all set you back? You're in a lockdown in Grand Bahama. How far has all of this set you back in the overall reconstruction?
It has certainly set us back tremendously, but we are still moving fast, all things considered, and as necessary, we are adjusting the emergency orders. We are urging persons to make application. Whoever can, who is offering essential services and was not previously listed, they are applying to the competent authority, and we are using reasonable judgment to ensure that all services that is in a position to help us with reconstruction, that they are up and running. Our hardware companies, they complied. They are all open in Grand Bahama. They are open in Abaco. We're sending materials in. We have quite a bit of material in harbor in Nassau right now to be shipped to Grand Bahama and Abaco. So after the passage of this tropical depression, tropical storm, we will be deploying materials again to Grand Bahama and to Abaco. So yes, it has
my final question, sir, has to do with those in the temporary homes and the domes, and even some of the tents. I mean, I would have seen them in Abaco myself. What happens to those individuals should any weather system that's going to bring a lot of rain and wind? I'm not even talking about a hurricane, but you know, heavy weather that comes with a tropical storm. What's going to happen with those folks?
But all the, particularly the trailer homes in Marsh Harbor, we are in the process of decommissioning them right now. So we're finding more resilient accommodations for persons, particularly in Abaco, where they're staying in those facilities. In Sweeting Ski, there are persons who are reconstructing their homes. We have temporary shelters in those areas, but at worst, in Sweeting Ski, we will perhaps do what we did during Tropical Storm Arthur. We will bring them onto the mainland and perhaps house them at Morris Moore Primary or even at the Islander Hotel. So we will do all that we can to ensure that persons are in hurricane-resistant structures, more resilient structures, as best as we can.
Minister, thank you very much for coming on tonight and talking to us. We know there's a lot going on. You know, it just seems as if every time we make one step forward, we get delayed slightly. But, you know, I encourage the people of Grand Bahama and everywhere to keep pushing. We still got a long way to go, and continue to stay safe.
And thank you very much for the information. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. When we come back, we get an inside look at Grand Bahama after the first week of their 2-week lockdown. We want to find out how the people there are holding up, even as a storm approaches. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. Tonight we discuss response and readiness. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. This segment is brought to you by the Grand Bahama Power Company. Grand Bahamians have undergone some of the worst months economically and emotionally in the past year, as they have had to rebuild their homes and livelihoods. after a number of positive cases in Grand Bahama. They continue now to try and grapple with this. The Prime Minister placed Grand Bahama on a mandatory 2-week lockdown in the hopes of gaining control of the outbreak. And now they, along with the rest of the Bahamas, are once again preparing for the possible landfall, that is, of another natural disaster. My guest for this portion of the show is a broadcast reporter and radio anchor at the Nassau Guardian in Grand Bahama, Taylor Ferguson. Taylor, welcome to On the Record. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tell us a little bit about the current state of Grand Bahama in this lockdown. You are now 1 week in. What has it been like for the thousands of Grand Bahamians who have once again found themselves in a lockdown?
Hi, Jerome, and thank you so much for having me tonight. The mood on Grand Bahama is one of obviously concern. Everybody is concerned first and foremost about their health and safety with the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we also have the perfect storm where we're dealing with a pandemic, and then we have the impending tropical storm, which could form into a hurricane. And, you know, we all know that a lot of people here are still struggling from Dorian. So the mood is one of concern, one of preparation, and there's a lot going on, but the people here are strong. And sometimes people confuse strong and resilient with indifferent, but I find that everyone here is in ready mode, and we have to be all the time because historically, that's just how it's been for Grand Bahama.
It's something you said that stuck out to me immediately. You said sometimes people confuse being strong with indifferent. Why is it that you think people think Grand Bahamians are indifferent in a situation like this?
Sometimes I feel people perceive Grand Bahamians as indifferent because they don't see a state of panic. They don't see fervor. And sometimes when people don't see that, they assume that people just aren't checking.
Interesting perspective. Following the first weekend and first few days, police would have reported a number of arrests for people breaking curfew. Are people taking it seriously? And how have those arrests sort of impacted people moving around? Are they now taking a step back? Or what's the general sort of feeling now towards the lockdown a week later?
A week in, what is happening is when you have stores that are still open, you know, we're still able to go to the grocery store, we're still able to go to the pharmacy, we're still able to go to the gas station. And now they've opened up the hardware stores because we're preparing for this system. I find that when you hear about arrests, because of the nature of the communities that we live in, people perceive them to be out and about, just hanging out. But in a lot of cases, there are people here who don't have homes, and their day-to-day lives require them to move about. They're either staying with people or they're having to find somewhere to stay on a day-to-day basis. We don't know everybody's circumstance. There are some people who are going to break the law. That's just how human nature is. But I don't think there's anybody that's just callously walking around carrying on about their normal day-to-day lives, knowing that we're in a lockdown. So everywhere you go, you're going to have people that are breaking the law. But for the most part, people here are adhering, and they're also trying to cope. Mm-hmm. So that has to always be taken into consideration.
I have to ask sort of what has been the reaction to the rising numbers? Every day, you know, we get the dashboard, we see the numbers. Some days are more shocking than others, but still we are shocked for the most part. But what's been the reaction to the rising numbers? I'd like to know where people are. And you know, I've got to ask, do people feel a sense of responsibility for where they are in this situation right now?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Right now, with the rising numbers, we're dealing with a population that normally is traveling. You know, a lot of Grand Bahamians travel to Florida for different reasons. And what's been disheartening through all of this is as our case numbers rise, the assumption that everybody is traveling to Florida to shop or just unnecessarily traveling is a wrong assumption. There are a lot of people here because we don't have a functioning hospital for all intents and purposes. And so there are a lot of people here who have to travel to Florida for medical reasons. There are a lot of people who have to get checkups, cancer treatments, etc. And yes, there are some people who need to travel to Florida leisure and also for business. They need to get supplies, they need to stock their businesses. And just the logistics of it all, it's all coming into play. And so the handful of people, and I say handful because it wasn't a mass exodus when the borders opened. So unfortunately, there were some people who traveled and came back and unknowingly contracted COVID-19. They have families, they have employers, they have businesses. And so during the course of time, people have interactions. And I think that's where our count is coming from. But I do not think that it's just a widespread community spread. I think it's not isolated, but through contact tracing, they're able to find the interactions that these people have had. And so if we had a lot of testing going on during a certain period, we're getting all those results back. And so when we see all these numbers every day, we're seeing 20s and, it's alarming, but at the same time, it shows that a lot of testing is going on here, and that's always a good thing.
Interesting you brought up testing. I wanted to know if you could, help us to understand, how the testing is going. It seems to be in large numbers. And are you getting a sense that these are new infections, or are these people who would have been infected maybe 2-3 weeks ago who are now just being tested? And then also, are people, the concern about the hospital, I want to talk about that as well, and those who have to be hospitalized.
Right. So it will always depend on the rate of the contact tracing. And if the contact tracing is happening at a rapid pace, then you will have more people being contacted, you will have more people being tested, and ultimately you will have more results coming in. So that's why I say the testing is always a good thing. And in terms of testing, we now have drive-through testing that's happening at a private facility. And as you know, Jerome, nobody can just request a COVID-19 test. So most of the testing is happening because health officials are contacting contacts of persons who they know are already positive. So if I feel like I had contact with someone who's COVID-19 positive, I can then go and make that case, but I still don't determine whether or not I get a test or when I get a test. And so the increased testing and the increased number of cases is all because people are being reached. And that's a great thing, because we don't want a situation where people are just hanging in the wind, not knowing if someone they were in contact with has been exposed.
If and when the borders reopen, we find ourselves back in a situation, what do you think is going to be done differently, from the community perspective? Are people going to do what they did before, or is it going to be different?
Well, first, I want to just quickly go back to the point I was making about the assumption that people are being irresponsible and people are just casually traveling and trying to spread COVID-19. It's not true. Grand Bahamians are, for the most part, yes, resilient, yes, strong, yes, they have been through a lot and they know how to come back out of situations, but at the same time, a very responsible and in-tuned community, because they have to be, because of everything that's happening. Everybody is in tune to what's going on around them and to their neighbors. I think that when the borders do reopen, you're going to have some of the same people who are going to travel for the reasons that I listed before. they have to travel. They need medical care. You know, our medical situation on the island is not ideal. And then you're going to have people who just want to get away. And, you know, as a free society, there's nothing you can do about that. If the borders are open, then you are telling people it's okay to travel.
Taylor, as the numbers continue to rise each day, the good news thus far is the hospitalizations have not been comparative to that. We've not seen a lot of hospitalizations, but what is the concern with you still not having a functioning hospital when you consider the inevitable is going to happen? People are going to have to be hospitalized.
Right. Well, even before COVID-19 was an issue, there was concern about the healthcare facilities on the island post Hurricane Dorian. The healthcare professionals here are doing an amazing job with the resources that they do have, and kudos to them. But with a pandemic comes increased concern about health and safety. And so you're going to have people being airlifted out because we just simply cannot treat them here. And so while COVID-19 is not a death sentence for most, it is still extremely concerning for anyone who contracts it, because if in the event you have to be hospitalized, we don't have the bed capacity here for increased hospitalizations. Luckily, for now, it's under control, but there is a fear, and especially with a storm coming, I can't stress that enough. It is so weighty, and it is something that you don't just have to think about contracting COVID-19. You have to think about, are you going to be able to get a hospital bed if you need one?
Very, very real concerns. Taylor, thank you so much for giving us a great perspective there. Thank you for helping us to understand. Continue to stay safe. And of course, we'll all be watching from here to hopefully things will get better. And hopefully this storm, as it passes by, will just bring some rain and, keep moving and keep us all safe. Yeah. So thank you very much, and continue to do the great job that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jerome. And I just want to say that we are Grand Bahama strong.
Oh, good way to add. We're with you on that. Most definitely. Thank you very much. When we come back, we're going to take a look now from Grand Bahama all the way over to Exuma. We're going to look at what's happening in that island, talking to a reporter there. Stay with us. Our program continues right after this. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and a balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back to On the Record. This is our final segment tonight. While Grand Bahama and New Providence have had the largest influx of COVID-19 cases, we must not forget those family islands that are now recording more and more numbers as the days go by. My guest for this segment of the show, as we discuss response and readiness, is Sammarko Lightbourne. He's a reporter at Blaze 98.3 FM in Exuma. Welcome to On the Record, Sammarko.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jerome. Pleasure to be here.
We're glad to have you. So Exuma went from the entire first wave without having a single case. Things are now very different. What has it been like after your confirmed cases were announced?
After the confirmed cases, of course, Exuma has always been an island that is, just super relaxed, very family-oriented. After the first confirmed case, you just noticed a remarkable change in everyone. Being very cautious, taking the health protocols very seriously. After the third case, you would have noticed almost an automatic adjustment to that, and even taking the emergency orders more seriously. So you've seen almost in a snap of a finger, businesses now opting to work remotely. A lot of the essential services reducing their hours, but persons are on constant alert at the moment.
Since the borders first opened up, did you see a large influx of guests to the island, both domestic and international guests? Did you see a lot of people coming in?
We did see a lot of persons coming in. While I can't give a specific number, for example, we were able to cover when the first international flight arrived, and the flight was fairly full. That was Silver Airways. Guests and tourists were very excited to come on the island. Exuma has been a hub for maritime tourism as well, so a lot of yachters were continuing to be on the island. So pretty much in the period of the lockdown, Exuma felt like a ghost town, and within a week of the borders reopening, you just felt like it was business as usual.
Were those individuals practicing the safety protocols?
Well, from the perspective of the airport, we covered the first few days, and persons were coming wearing their mask, trying to keep a safe distance away. The Taxi Driver Association in Exuma, they did a phenomenal job in terms of having training and using all their protocols, sanitizing after transporting each client. Now, in terms of when you were to go to a hub like the Fish Fry, you would notice that a lot of our tourists were not abiding by the protocols, especially in terms of wearing the mask. So that was a real concern of mine, as well as a lot of Exumians.
You mentioned maritime tourists. A few weeks ago, I witnessed myself while on a boat there, just a line of yachts along the various quays in Exuma. Who is policing those yachts and those individuals to ensure that they're keeping the proper protocols, that they have the proper documentation? Are they quarantining? Have they gotten their, PCR tests? Is that happening with that segment of the population?
And that's the thing, Jerome, and it's been a very serious concern of mine, especially if you look at somewhere like the Georgetown area, which is the capital, and yachts coming in. There really isn't any law enforcement presence there that is actively or proactively having a system in place where they are vetting the persons coming in. And this has been something that I've been constantly questioning as a reporter. The answer has been that, before these persons are coming into the country, they are filling in the necessary paperwork. But that paperwork only goes so far. And then Exuma has so many keys. This is the ideal place to island hop as a yachter. So, they're going from key to key to key. And again, as we know, if you do contract the virus, if you're not asymptomatic, it does take a few days, for any symptoms to show up. So that's been one of the huge concerns for islanders, is the freedom of yachters and boaters to really roam around the Exuma chain and keys. But there isn't any concrete presence that you can feel 100% comfortable that due diligence is being done while we have these boaters visit the island.
And I'm sure that is a huge concern, even from this end, listening to that, because we've got to be vigilant with folks coming in. And I could tell you, even from my experience, a lot of yachters that I sort of spoke to in passing were from Miami or the Florida area. And we know that is certainly still the epicenter of all of this. I want to turn our attention now to the storm preparations. What's the general mood of folks on the island now that we are faced with the first threat of a storm for the season?
Now, initially, when we got the alert from the Department of Meteorology, so I did see persons, they're going to the food store. I wouldn't use the term stockpiling, but they're trying to get all the necessary provisions. As I traveled the island yesterday, and just more of doing a survey, I did notice that persons sort of reduced the measures they were taking, and I think that had to do a lot with NEMA's recent presentation, and I believe that would have been Yes, that would have been the 29th of July, NEMA's recent presentation, where it seemed that we were out of the range of the cone. At least the entirety of the Bahamas was not encompassed by the cone. And it's predicted that possibly it won't be a category 1 or 2, but would remain a severe weather system, perhaps a tropical storm. And I noticed that persons started to reduce the sort of efforts that they were doing. Even in my neighborhood, if I can just speak to that, persons were battening up, as we like to say, just a few days ago, and then everything pretty much ceased.
I think that's probably atypical of a lot of Bahamians. Once you hear it's not a huge threat, then we tend to pull back, which is not always a good thing.
Right.
Do you feel that you are prepared on the island? Shelters, the readiness of shelters, the accessibility of shelters, even the concern with social distancing with shelters. Do you feel that you are prepared in Exuma, not just for this storm, but we've got quite a few months left in the hurricane season, and it gets busier later on in the year. Do you feel you're prepared, even when it comes to your shelters, accessibility and things of that nature?
So first of all, Exuma has been quite blessed and spared as we look at the last few storms. I think the most significant storm that affected us was Hurricane Noel, which caused quite a degree of flooding and instability in the job market because persons weren't able to transport to and fro as they were accustomed to. In looking at the revised hurricane shelters, what I noted was that in my community there was a few churches listed previously that have since been removed because of the derelict state they're currently in. So I do notice that the current list of shelters in Exuma, they are the ones that are quite structurally sound. In a conversation with local government, they have been making their checks. So I do feel confident in that regard, that the shelters here, that we're able to utilize them and everything will be fine. In terms of the social distancing, that is a big concern because, again, like I would have mentioned earlier, you go to places like the fish fry here, Jerome, and persons are, the mask is hanging from the air a lot of the times. A lot of officials from the island administrator to our member of parliament, Chester Cooper, he's been advocating for persons to really adhere to these protocols. So my concern is more of if persons are able to police themselves in these situations.
Mm-hmm. What do you think really is going to be your greatest concern in the next few weeks? It doesn't look like there's an end in sight for the country, even in the world at this point. Exuma, like so many other places, depends heavily on tourism, and with the country being shut down in many aspects, even though we're still allowed some freedoms, what's going to be your key concern going forward for a country and a string of keys that depends so heavily on tourism?
Yes. So first of all, my main concern would be should our COVID-19 cases continue to climb, and God forbid, the capacity that we have on this island to really mitigate and contain that. I've been constantly asking in our Ministry of Health briefings and conferences, if we could get some specific data regarding, how many isolation rooms there are, what's the capacity of patients, and we've often gotten the answer, not a direct answer, but that things are under control. And that just doesn't fly right for Exumians. I can tell you, for example, when it's school season and kids need to be vaccinated or immunized, that the process is extremely tedious. They have to schedule you. And I'm thinking if, we can't streamline something like that, how are we now going to streamline COVID-19 care? And we just have really the Exuma Community Mini Hospital. That would be the main government infrastructure here. While it's a gorgeous, huge building, it is still highly unutilized. There are persons, you need an ultrasound, for example, and different things. They need to get someone from Nassau, and then who knows when that will be. Again, as you said, we are a chain of islands that depend heavily on tourism. And it's almost been buzzwords preached for a decade or two that we need to diversify, we need to go into farming, we need to do all of these things. And unfortunately, those industries have not taken root yet in Exuma. So it's very hard to imagine how long we can economically sustain ourselves if the borders do not open, if COVID-19 does not improve, dissipate, and tourism can resume as normal. And that's the unfortunate truth, is that we rely too heavily on tourism when there are so many things that
So very true for all of us. Sammarko, thank you very much for coming on and giving us great perspective. And certainly I know that even in the press conferences, people appreciate the questions that you bring and the perspective of the family islanders that those selfish folks in New Providence don't always bring forward. So thank you very much, and continue to do great work and continue to keep safe.
Thank you so much, Jerome.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure being here. Take care.
Great. Thanks. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of On the Record. Special thanks to all my guests, Greg Thompson, the Honourable Iram Lewis, Taylor Ferguson, and Sammarko Lightbourne. Special thanks to my production and technical teams as well for making this show possible. And of course to you, our viewers. We couldn't do it without you. Remember to stay up to date with the latest news and information on this network, our News Nightly, and our News Bahamas on Facebook. See you next time, same place, same time, right here on the Record.